welcome to the Provocative Polemics podcast. I am your host, Robert Lee Schinkel, where we stay provocative and speak polemical. I have a guest here on our very first episode here, and if you wouldn't mind, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, pleasure to be here. My name is Kyle Wolfe, and yeah, don't know what all you want me to say, man.
Just go ahead and give a very brief description to the listeners as to like what kind of stances, like in the general, like whether or not you're conservative, Democrat, Libertarian, like what are you and like.
Sure. So I originally got my start as a Democrat, is how I was raised. My have a mom who's a conservative and a dad who's a Democrat. So I grew up kind of seeing both sides, and I was a big Democratic supporter up until around 2016, 2017, where my political alignment switched over to being libertarian, and I've been there ever since. And for most, I guess, political votes, I still mostly vote Democrat in some areas. But where I align with Republicans, I would say less government is something I definitely agree with, and conservatives. So very much old school libertarian, as long as I'm not hurting anyone.
Okay.
It's none of your business what I do with my body. Now, public, there should be a dress code, if you will, decorum. But
right.
In my own home, if you're not hurting anyone else, you do you, boo-boo.
Okay. Well, we will definitely get into
that explains
yeah.
where I'm at libertarian-wise.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. I would also classify myself as a libertarian. So essentially, do whatever you want with your freedoms. We live in the greatest country in the world, I think. So with all of the freedoms that have been bestowed onto us, within the realms of the law, do whatever you want. And as well, like there are some things that are social taboos, right? Which, I mean, I will eventually get to on this show and whatnot, and perhaps even on this podcast. But as it pertains to that, like, of course, you got to live within those to some extent, right? But of course, there are some things where people like to blur the lines and go through those boundaries. But yeah, so Kyle here was watching some of my videos, and he reached out to me saying how he would like to be on the podcast, because as you all will know, I want to give everyone a platform to be able to express their opinions and where we can have some respectful, civil, and calm dialogue and just go back and forth and be able to really dissect our points of views and really make sure that we know where we stand and what it is that we want to embrace, both politically, ideologically, religiously. So you said that you watched my first live stream, which I worked through the kinks with the first one, so the rest of them won't be as bad. But if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and explain to the audience how you perceived it and what you thought.
I thought it was a good video. Obviously, if you add to the context of the issues you had and that you're already working on it, the layout was okay. It definitely was topics that are definitely prevalent. For example, you went over the transgender, and I forget the woman's. I'm assuming she's British.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree. She's awesome. Anytime an old woman that doesn't just give two craps speaks her mind, it just does my soul good.
Yes.
But yeah, they were definitely topics to go over that I think are important to go over. They're ones that I think the transgender talks, and especially the racial talks, and I think someone in there kind of brought up the BLM movement again for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And they're topics that unfortunately get too heated, far too quick, but they're simultaneously topics that we have to discuss. And we have to find a middle ground with both sides, and
right.
That it's important that we keep talking about them. So I'm glad to see people are still bringing them up, even though sometimes it feels like they're preached and talked about over and over again. But it's important, I think, to remember that until we figure out the problem, we can't stop talking about these things.
Oh, exactly. Yes, and for the listeners who have not seen that live video, if you go to my YouTube channel, Provocative Polemics, and you can access that through either YouTube, the YouTube app, or if you want to find all the other social media, which I'll bring up at the end, you can go to LinkTree for my page. So that's linktr.ee/provocative polemics. And you'll see my YouTube channel, the donation box, and the rest of the social media that you can check out, where, of course, I speak on polemical issues. But for those who have not seen the video or what we are referencing, her name is Germaine Greer, and she is like one of the original feminists. And she gets called a TERF. And for those who don't know what a TERF is, it's a trans exclusionary radical feminist, which is a new term that they have brought up to try to silence the women who don't want biological males entering their spaces, dominating the things that they do, and taking credit away from them. So that is something that we'll get to. But I would like to start off with my main topic that I like to talk about and ask you to elaborate on your position on abortion before I bring in some of the questions to really like hone in and either try to change your mind about it or just to really understand like what your position is on it.
Sure. So, legality of outright making it illegal and being pro, I jump back and forth. On a personal level, where I am in that position, at least in the context of how my life is now, I struggle seeing a scenario in which I would want to kill my unborn child.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that, being raised in a conservative Christian home, I was raised to believe, that ultimately is a sin, that you are killing a child.
Right.
Which is usually why most of the time it comes to votes and legality reasons. I still am a big supporter of the first heartbeat law. To me, once you hit around that stage, which I think is 7-8 weeks, just 2
6
months,
weeks,
I was more than comfortable with a lot of that. To me, that's just the morning after pill with some extra steps, if you will. I think once you get to a point, when they start talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, me personally, I was premature. I was born right around 7 months.
Okay.
And when I was born, I was 3 pounds.
That's like 29 weeks.
Yeah. And so when I start to hear people talk about how they're okay with abortion at 7, 8 months, I'm
right. You could have died. You could have been dismembered.
Yes, in my head, I'm here, and I went from a premature 2-3 pound baby to 6'4" and a monster. And
yeah.
my cousin, who's 5 months younger than me, she was born at 5 months, and she weighed half a pound.
Wow.
So there's
that's reaching the world record of premature babies because if I recall correctly, and of course it could have changed since I looked this up a few months ago, but the earliest premature baby on record I think is 21 weeks and 5 days.
That's very early.
That's really early.
Yeah, most people don't realize it too. The just how much being born early changes. For example, even though I was born 7 months, my lungs and brain, it finishes developing. You finish developing outside the womb,
of course,
which causes issues. But regardless, her and I are both in our 30s now, and that's where I struggle with that aspect of abortion. And I also have I think when it comes in terms of someone who, if the mom would die, that seems to be an argument that's brought up. If one of the two is going to die, and you can't change that fact, and we can guarantee the mother will survive, I don't think even people who are pro-life, I don't think anyone is really arguing that having that removal of the child when the health is at risk is really a major problem. And to be honest, I don't understand why that comes into the topic as being a defense for being pro my body, my rights, but to each their own, I suppose.
Yeah, so just to talk on that point a little bit. So I, for one, as people will soon realize, I am not pro-life. Even though I am a pro-life gen leader with Students for Life of America, part of the Men's Invictus Fellowship, the thing is that I am actually an abortion abolitionist. So there's a big difference between being pro-life and an abortion abolitionist. So I want the total, complete abolition and criminalization of abortion. And the biggest difference between them, though, is that those who are pro-life most of the time don't want the death penalty for a rapist, a murderer, or someone who is trafficking humans, like selling and owning humans,
Mm-hmm.
I am totally for the death penalty for those 3 crimes, as long as, of course, through the court of law that we have and the judicial process, that it is without a doubt they are the one who committed it and they did commit it. If we can prove that without a doubt, totally. But of course, there are some people who are falsely accused, but of course, leaving that for discussion at another time. So I am for like the death penalty of them, and I want the total and complete abolition of abortion. But to remark on the comment of the life of the mother, right? That really doesn't happen as much as they want to bring up, right?
Absolutely.
But the thing is that they need to realize that it is another human inside of her, within her womb, right? So why are we just going to either dismember it or pull it out of the body and not give it any care? Because that's a part of the thing with the Born Alive bill. A lot of the Democrats vetoed and like voted against it, which all it did was that it told abortion clinics that if they failed and the child were born and they're still living even through the abortion procedure, they have to treat them as a second patient, right? And like the sort of like I don't know what to call it, but like the slogan or motto of like OBGYNs is like, I am concerned with two patients, the mother and her unborn child, right? That unborn child from fertilization until birth should be treated as a second patient, right? If the mother's life is in jeopardy, right, because of the gestation of the child, well, if the child has to be removed from the safe place that it's in, which is the womb, right? That's been naturally through evolution, or if you're religious, through the God-designed womb, right? The thing is, if we're going to have to extricate it from there, then we should force through the Hippocratic Oath of physicians to treat that child as another patient or as another person coming into the emergency room with an emergency.
See,
right?
I agree with that. You know, that's why I always make the point to make the statement that when both lives are at point and only the mother's life is guaranteed, because I don't say that to imply that we should just automatically go, let's kill the baby.
Right.
That's not where I'm coming from. It's more
course.
of, you know, the act of removing the baby, like the way you worded it. That is a lot better way to put it. I think the stigmatism should be fine in society, from my eyes, to remove a little bit of that and have understanding that you are going to have instances where, for example, I forget the medical term, but the baby isn't growing fully in the womb. It's closer to, I think, the tubes.
Oh, you're talking about an ectopic pregnancy.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, those are pregnancies where, in most cases, if the infant isn't removed, both, you know, have a high risk of death. And there's the likelihood of saving one is very much higher with the mother.
Right. And the thing is, there has been no bill, to my knowledge, and if I am wrong, which I'm pretty confident that I'm not saying this, but if I am, please let me know. But to my knowledge, there has been no bill in my lifetime of being an abolitionist of a law that stops ectopic pregnancies from being terminated, because that is not a natural pregnancy.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's in an unnatural state. And the thing is, if left to its biological processes, the child will die and the mother will die. We don't want that, right? So the thing is, obviously at that point, it is very unfortunate, but remove the ectopic pregnancy.
Which is why I brought up the comment. I struggle with why that's used as a talking point, because
Well, it's because they want to argue from extremes, which is actually a logical fallacy.
For example, a lot of people that are pro my body, my choice, they use the topic of rape. The amount of, again, I don't want to make assumptions here, because not everyone comes out and says, hey, I was sexually assaulted, but not everyone who's raped that ended up pregnant because of that rape wants nothing to do with the child. There's plenty of there are plenty of examples who people turn that into the best of a bad situation, if you will. And that doesn't mean everyone does. And I understand that there's going to be traumas and things like that attached. I'm usually more in the line of, two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly.
And just because you were treated poorly by a human being doesn't give you the right to treat another human being poorly. So, and I think that's part of what makes it tough, because especially someone like me, from my experience, most libertarians, because we float kind of right there in the middle in most cases, I see two sides, and I understand the people putting themselves in that situation that are pro-abortion. It's like I kind of get it. There are people out there. It's like I can't have a baby, and while my argument to that is if you open up a bottle of pop, flies can get in. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't open the bottle of pop, flies can't get in. If you have sex, you can. That's how babies are made.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to not make a baby is to not have sex, and that is usually one of my biggest annoyances is usually the lack of accountability on that side of the
Yes.
argument. And I think the other big issue is why a lot of people butt heads is because the uh, pro life side and then the pro choice side, one side is saying that it's my body, my rights, and the other one's saying it's the baby's rights. And I think that is also what causes the biggest conflict is both sides aren't coming at this from two sides of the same coin. They're coming from completely different arguments, I mean, and circling around the same thing. And my biggest annoyance is look, I'll give you your argument on why you think it's okay for abortion, but just be honest and admit you want to kill a baby.
Right.
And I understand why you don't want to admit that. You're killing babies. I wouldn't want to admit to the world that I'm doing that either. Not to mention the fact I'm sure majority of people that have that done, I mean, it's psychological trauma for a lot of those people. It's not an easy thing. Some do it like it's trick or treating, but I understand a lot of that. And you don't, but you have to at some point start to admit some truths before, I mean, you can actually start trying to again, find that middle ground.
Right. So, I'm going to walk you through what I do with all of the pro aborts
Sure.
that I speak with. So, when it comes to the my body, my choice argument, right?
Hmm.
I think it's quite flawed, right? Because the thing is scientifically, right? If it were your body, like they want to call it a parasite or it's like a tumor and I want it removed, right? So, scientifically and factually, right? If it were just a tumor, it would have originated from cells that are only identical to cells of your body, right? At the moment of fertilization, only half of that genetic material is yours, as you are the mother.
Well, it's
Regardless,
actually slightly over half. It's like 50.00239%. You actually get slightly more than your mother than you do your father.
uh, yes, and that's
Just because the way the
that
XY chromosomes work out, missing that little bit that turns the Y into an X is, uh, it might as well be 50-50. But I researched a lot of that a while back. It was real fascinating. Yeah, you actually get slightly more from your mother than you do your father, but it's less than 0.5%
right,
difference.
half of your chromosomes came from your mother, half of them
Hmm.
came from your father. Yeah, because the amount of DNA, if we're talking about base pairs of the Y chromosome versus the final X sex chromosome,
Hmm.
right? Obviously, the X chromosome is a lot bigger, right? But that aside,
Just threw it out because
yeah,
it is fascinating.
yeah, it is pretty awesome. Once you start learning like the in depths of biochemistry and biology, there is just so much that's out there, right? Especially like there are some organisms that are triploid with their sex chromosomes, meaning they have three chromosomes to determine sex, right? And that goes into a lot of nuance with how they present themselves, like physically. But we can talk about that on another point. But like the fact is that she is the mother, right? And
Hmm.
only it would come back as being this is your child, right? If we genetically test it, right? So it's not your cell, it's not your body. It's not like you're rubbing your hand across your arm and then you flaked off thousands of cells, right? Because I also like to pose this to the pro aborts. I'm like, okay, so it's your body, your choice, right? Okay, let's say there's a mother who's pregnant. I don't care how far along she is, but for clarity's sake, just to make it like sort of obvious for them, right? Let's say she's 5 months pregnant, right? She's obviously going to show the fetus is going to be a pretty good size, right?
Hmm.
All right, there will be plenty of tissue, right? So let's say there was a bomb that exploded, right? But let's say like she totally didn't get completely eviscerated or like totally atomized, right? So like there's clearly flesh everywhere, right? Sorry for the graphic nature, but just to I mean we are talking about something that's graphic in nature, so it kind of fits. But if we had forensic scientists come to that crime scene and they tested the tissue, would they say that there was only one victim? Oh, it's just the lady who exploded. Or would they say, no, there were two victims, the mother and her child?
Well, again, that comes down to who you're speaking with, unfortunately. There is a distinctual DNA difference there.
Mm-hmm.
That is without a doubt evident. But that becomes the hair crux of the situation. If you talk to someone who's pro rights, they would say that it was a mother only. So
Yeah, and then the other thing that we like to ask is, oh, so you're a woman, you had a male, right? For instance, you're a male and you came out of your mother, right? Of course, or at least I hope so.
I hope.
Yeah. And so the thing is, when she was pregnant with you, was she intersex? Because she had a penis inside of her. So, like, was that her penis or was that your penis, right? And that's, like, another thing that kind of forces them to, like, concede the point that it's not, like, the body that's inside of your body is not actually yours, right? Because to dive it even further with the science, right? So you have the womb, right? Imagine, like, a balloon, right? And on the inside of that balloon, all of the air, right? Let's say there's like a little piece that is suction cupped to the end of it, okay? And then there's a tube that's coming out, and then the baby is attached to that tube, okay? So the tube is the umbilical cord, okay? And in that suction cup, there are two halves to it. The inner half is actually only derived from the cells of the embryo, and the other half is cells from the mother, right? And the placenta, that organ that's there, that's basically glued to the edge of the uterus. That is where the nutrients are exchanged between the mother circulatory system and the fetal circulatory system, right? And so, of course, in order for it to be given to the fetus, those cells have to be distinct from hers, and they are originating only from the embryo and then eventually fetus once it progresses through its development. But the thing is, inside of the womb, inside of the balloon analogy, there's another balloon that the baby is inside of, right? But outside of that, like, inner balloon is the placenta, and that inner balloon is the amniotic sac. And so the amniotic sac is like its own personal bubble that it keeps itself inside of. And again, those are cells only derived from the embryo. And it's just so remarkable that, like, the developing human inside makes its own, like, personal bubble. It's its own personal safe space inside of the mother, right? I mean, have you heard of that or been
Oh yeah.
told all of that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm usually the type of person before I try to always research any topic before I jump to conclusions. Now, if I'm making an opinion about someone that slapped someone and I saw it right in front of me, I got all the evidence I need there. But to whether it be this or anything politically, one of the worst things you can do is not do research on that. And learning all of that definitely helped my opinion in this.
Right. Yeah, and it's just so miraculous how, like, evolution has driven this process for, like, the embryo's self-guided growth in order to make all of these structures for itself. Like, it's just absolutely remarkable.
Well, the
and
fascinating
mind-blowing.
thing too is the microorganisms that are within our body that aren't part of our body. We have like our gut biome and things like that. You have those same bacterias within the womb while the child's growing, helping the child grow. So you have all these like a giant city, if you will, of organisms.
So, to my knowledge, the microbiome doesn't actually develop until they're outside of the womb, and
well,
the first
the
time
babies
they get
itself,
it,
but you have the mother has her own biome system within her body in different parts, like the filtration system up until I forget the point where the waste the baby creates is tied in with the mother until a certain point, and then that's actually what most people don't know. That's what your water is when your water breaks. It's you get the sac and the baby just starts filling up its own so it can separate from the mother.
Yep.
And but yeah, it's you not only have a human being growing another human being, but you have all these other organisms living within you that are helping the process along.
Yeah.
And it's it's one of those situations where if you look at the micro, it almost seems like its own universe.
Yeah, and so getting back to the portion where you were talking about like the difference between like the pro aborts are concerned with the woman's bodily autonomy, as they like to call it, right? And then the anti aborts, or the also called pro lifers, like they're concerned with the right to life of the child,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the thing is, in order to change the mind of the pro lifers, you need to convince them that the developing human inside of the uterus isn't living and it's not a life. If you can do that, which I don't think is really possible, right? Then I think you could change their mind.
See, this may sound harsh,
Mm-hmm.
but the other side of the same coin of whether I'm pro or against is
Mm-hmm.
like when I started this whole, my stance, I said
Mm-hmm.
the way I personally feel about it, I wouldn't
Right.
do it.
Right.
But again, cynical, but I don't care what you do with your baby. Like again, that sounds cold. I think you're wrong if you want to kill your child, but
Mm-hmm.
it's your child. If you want to ruin your life and another one's life, I I mean, that's not my poor decision, and that's usually where, ironically, my struggle with being abolishing abortion is if those people want to go out and do those things and ruin lives, it's not my my choice making that,
Mm-hmm.
and who am I to force someone to not make a bad decision? If that makes any sense, it's
Right.
why should I care that they want to get rid of their child? But then that becomes the argument where my biggest kerfuffle with the my body my right group is to me the majority of the arguments are coming from a lack of responsibility,
Yeah.
like admitting that you got pregnant. For example, not only was I premature, but my father and mother were only dating like 2.5 months.
Right.
I was not planned. They were a new relationship. Condoms don't always work.
Right.
I am here because of that example. My parents weren't ready. My mom was in college, and so was my father. My mom had just started college. So,
So what year were you born again?
89.
89.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Roe v. Wade had already been a thing for quite a while and pretty well established by that point. So you could have potentially been aborted.
Had my mother not been raised in a Christian conservative home with a pastor as a father, yes. But because I was raised in that home, baby was having the baby. That, and
Yeah.
even though my dad's side is Democrat, you're blue collar Democrat. So even blue collar Democrats, a lot of that is the old bring out the shotgun. You got my wife or daughter pregnant, you're going to marry her.
Uh-huh.
You see that on both sides of the political side, and then that still was a lot of the context. It was my dad's mom was, you got her pregnant, you step up, you're going to marry her, you're going to take care of the baby. So
Right.
that's my family's from eastern Ohio and coal mining country. So even though you have Democrats within the family, there's still a lot of that old mindset of taking responsibility. And again, that I think that's my biggest complaint is, like I said, admitting your body, your rights, fine, but you're killing a child. If you're going to make your argument, at least make your argument from a place of honesty.
Right.
You're trying to avoid responsibility. You chose to do those things, and you're doing it. Now, if you still want to be able to have abortions, then make that argument. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to make that argument. If there's always going to be two sides of everything, and come forward and tell me your opinion and try to convince me as to why you think you should have abortions, but don't remove truths from your argument, or you're going to lose me and my ability to want to listen to your argument, and that's my biggest complaint with all of that. And that's usually why the first heartbeat law I was fine with. You're talking morning after pill. That's something that I've been with girls, and oops, let's go get the morning after pill, just in case. And to me, that first month or so, meh. I'm kind of floating on that one. I don't feel as bad. But the second they put something on there and there's a heartbeat going on, you've lost our argument with me of being able to say that there's just, something growing and this was a mistake. Now you're at the stage of, hey, there's a heartbeat, there's a baby clearly growing within me. I've got to start taking responsibilities. And that's why, I agree, usually in voting wise, that first heartbeat law being my cutoff.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So, before I continue on to potentially changing your mind, I just want to make sure that I and the listeners understand your stance. And
Sure.
so you're saying that once the heartbeat occurs, which is typically between weeks 6 and 7,
Hmm.
with the average being heavily towards 6, because it's a spectrum, because biology is not ever like set in stone, right?
Absolutely.
And so I just want to make sure that you're saying that once that occurs, right, the proto heart begins to develop and cycle the nutrients throughout the fetus, because, or actually it's an embryo at that point, because it's gotten so large that simple diffusion is not enough to administer all of those nutrients throughout the whole body. At that point, you are anti-abortion.
Yes, yes. In my mind, you're talking being at a point where, to me, you lose argument saying that you're not talking about something else. And I understand the second those cells start dividing, you're getting unique cells.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that part of the science 100%.
Okay.
But to me, my comfortableness with agreeing with abortion or stopping the pregnancy, to me, that's not so much killing a baby in my mind. It's more stopping a pregnancy from going forward, if that makes any sense at that stage. And the heartbeat laws, to me, where you're hitting a point where you're beyond being able to stop the pregnancy. You're full-fledged in. This is happening. There's proof that that thing's in there. It's growing. And even though, to me, you've got that wiggle room where it's like it's starting. We're baking a baby. You're mixing the ingredients. We're there. Pie's in the oven. It's 20 minutes, and that first minute or two, you pull it out. To me, that's that first 5-6 weeks. But you get to that point, it's like, you've got a cake in the oven. You don't have batter cooking at that point. You've got a cake finishing in the oven. If that analogy makes any sense.
Yeah, so I was actually going to bring up an awesome comedian that I really love. His name's Bill Burr. I'm assuming you're familiar with him. Yeah, so I think he's just fucking hilarious. So he's like, all right, let's talk about abortion in the middle of, I think it was Colorado, super leftist state. And if I need to research it, but I know that they were trying to get abortion all the way through all 9 months of gestation.
I think they were at 7 months was the main pitch at that point, because that's when a lot of me coming in going, hey guys, I'm 7-month born baby. Mm-hmm. So I know West Virginia, I think, was the one that was pushing 9 months.
Yeah, currently, to my knowledge, it's Maryland, New York, and California are the only 3 that have through all 9 months. I know, right?
The baby can be born, and then you still decide whether it's no. Like, even my argument of you got a heartbeat, you're making a baby, that's you're not even at plausibility. The baby's laying on the table. It's making noises and looking at you. Like,
yeah. So Bill Burr brought up, I don't know if you've seen this particular comedy special, but he's like, all right, let's talk abortion. If I'm going to make a cake for my birthday, right, I have the flour, right, the dry ingredients.
That's where I get the cake analogy
I have
from.
The wet ingredients, right? That's like the woman and the man. You put it together, and, I have cake batter, right? But then you throw that bitch in the oven, and then you let it cook, but you take it out in 10 minutes when it's supposed to bake for 50 minutes, and then you slide it across the floor. And I'm like, what the fuck did you do to my cake, right? And he's just like, they're like, well, it's not a cake. That's just cake batter. And he's like, well, it would have been had you not fucking thrown it out, right? And so he's just like, I'm pro-abortion, but, I just want you to admit that you're killing a baby, right? And I think that's where it really boils down to, right? We need to hold people accountable for their positions, right? And so we should really try to understand what it is that they're actually saying and try to get them to admit that that's what they're saying, right? And so I don't know how many of the pro-abortion conversations you've seen on YouTube, but there are plenty of them that are like, well, my body, my choice. And then this one girl literally said, you know what? Fuck babies. And then she just walked off, right? So clearly she's not being honest and forward with her opinion.
Or maybe she is being honest and was kind of like me earlier, where it's like, I don't care about other people's babies. Mm-hmm. Like morally it's wrong to me, but at the same time it's like I'm not the one, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Killing the baby here, that's your choice, your baby, man. It's just be honest that that's what you're doing here.
Yeah. And so back to the heartbeat bill.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of critics about it, right? And so the thing is, they're like, And there's this really far left doctor that I used to follow on YouTube. Her name is Mama Dr. Jones. Okay, you can find her videos there. She spoke about the heartbeat bill when it was first introduced, and she also spoke about Plan B and how it's not an abortifacient, which Plan B is the over-the-counter name for levonorgestrel, and there's also the CVS brand Aftera or After A. You know, it was kind of a funny like clapback.
It's the one I've always bought.
That yeah.
It's the cheaper of the two.
Yes. Oh, by almost half the price. I used to be a pharmacy tech for CVS.
Yeah, they tell you to take that and a bunch of vitamin D.
Yep. And so the thing is that with levonorgestrel, right, it can stop an embryo that has formed from being able to implant. And therefore, it should be classified as an abortifacient, even though that is not its primary reason to be administered or its primary mechanism of action. Because levonorgestrel, the way that it's supposed to work, right, or the way that it was intended to work, right, is to prevent ovulation, right? So if you've already ovulated, Plan B does absolutely nothing for you, right? Or at least most of the time, right? Because its other mechanisms that do occur is that it can make the uterine lining inhospitable or impossible for the embryo to implant and further the pregnancy, right? Because you're classified as being pregnant not at the point of fertilization, but actually gestation starts at the beginning of your period that led to that egg being released from the follicle. That's when it, like, the actual classification starts. And so all these critics with the heartbeat bill, right, they were saying it's not enough time for the woman to know that she's pregnant, right? Because I'm certain you have heard plenty of times before that, like, some women don't know that they're pregnant until they're like 12 weeks, right? Which...
It happens.
I mean...
It does happen.
Right, but to my opinion...
Sorry, cut you off. You know you had sex. Mm-hmm. That's my rebuttal there. It's like, you may not know you got pregnant, but did you have sex? I don't know a single woman that I have ever had relations with or spoken to that didn't know that the Kumbala sauce went in the designed area. Like, pretty sure they felt it and knew it was in there. You know, there are plenty of steps, and that's my big problem with that argument. It's like, you may not have known, but tough cookies. You knew the process. Again, the whole bake and cake analogy. You were mixing the batter, and you know what I mean? You threw it in the oven. You were there for all of that. You may not have forgot the cake baked and come back and it's a burnt cake. Fair enough, but you were definitely there for the process of making it, and that's my argument for that entire process. Right. It's that accountability part of it. And if for me, if you get past that first heartbeat and I found out 12 weeks, well, get ready to have a baby.
Yeah, and I'll come back to the accountability part, as well as the argument that men are at fault for all pregnancy. So I'll come back to that in a second. But when it comes to knowing whether or not you're pregnant, right, the telos, or the intended or like manifested outcome of the act of coitus, or you know, intercourse, copulation, is procreation, is pregnancy, right? Whether or not it happens, right, is a consequence of other factors being there. Whether or not you had a hysterectomy, whether he had his vas deferens snipped through, you know, what's called a vasectomy, which I'm real quick, because words have meaning, is like my slogan. So it's called a vasectomy, but it's called the vas deferens, right? So why is it not vas deserectomy, right? It makes no sense to me. But
sounds better the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, but I always thought that was interesting. They only use the first word of the Latin name for that tube. But anyway, but like, there are certain things that you can do in order to attempt to prevent it. But the only thing that is 100% absolutely going to stop fertilization is abstinence. But I know that a lot of people can't do that, right?
You could argue removal of the ovaries.
Yeah, removal.
Just to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Or removal of the testes,
But the thing is, most people don't do that, right? So the only thing that, like, the common person can do,
exactly.
like, without any sort of, like, medical intervention, right, is that. But even getting a vasectomy,
There's no guarantee.
the thing is, there is no semen that is holding sperm, right? Because you will still ejaculate,
Hmm.
right? You'll still produce seminal fluid, but the thing is that it doesn't have the sperm in it, right?
Hmm.
That's the only thing the vas deferens does. It brings the sperm, basically, the testes. There's a mechanism that basically pushes the sperm through the vas deferens into the seminal vesicle, and it gets put into that seminal fluid, right?
Hmm.
So the thing is, and you can look it up. You roughly have to ejaculate 30-ish times in order for there to be no sperm left, right? And that's the common thing is they say this isn't going to be effective until you essentially masturbate or have sex about 30 times, right? 30 orgasms roughly.
Hmm.
But anywho, uh, as it pertains to whether or not you know that you're pregnant, right? I think it is laziness on both partners' parts, right? But it's more so the woman's responsibility of knowing whether or not she's pregnant because it is her body, right? And the baby has to gestate only inside of her, as it is for most mammals, if not all. And so the thing is that the lifetime of the egg, right, is more pivotal than the lifetime of the sperm. The lifetime of the egg is 48 hours, right? Essentially, after 48 hours, it will just die, and it's not able to continue and be able to be fertilized by the sperm and penetrated. But the lifetime of the sperm is up to a week. But yet again, much like in biology, it's a bell curve, right?
Yeah.
Their lifetime is heavily centered around the 3 to 4 day mark. So even if we give the full potential lifetime of all sperm, right, which is
Hmm.
statistically improbable, right? But we'll do it just for argument's sake. So 7 days plus we'll even add on the 2 days of the egg, even though they have to coincide in order for fertilization. But for sake of argument, right, we'll add the 2 days. So that's 9 days. So 9 days after ejaculation or having sex, copulation, is when fertilization would occur. Okay, you have to add another week roughly before it actually implants, and it's producing the hormone that's called human chorionic gonadotropin, which is actually what's detected in pregnancy tests.
Hmm.
And about 2 weeks after you have sex, you should be able to tell through a pregnancy test, whether it's through the blood or through an at-home pregnancy test that's urinalysis. So, you have the urine stick basically. You should be able to tell at that point that you're pregnant. So if you are comfortable morally and legally where you live with the heartbeat bill, it's totally more than enough time for 6 weeks gestation because at that point it would be 4 weeks. You have 2 weeks, and this is giving less time than what is actually in reality because you would have 2 to 3 weeks instead of just two. So 2 to 3 weeks in order to get that abortion that you so desire. But the thing is, most people nowadays lack the responsibility
They don't check.
for self care and checking. Right? If you don't want to be pregnant, you should be doing everything in your power to know whether or not you're one pregnant or two to not be pregnant. Right? And to stop fertilization from occurring.
Absolutely.
And so
And as you said, you have that at most 4 weeks. To me that's a month.
mm-hmm.
You have a month if you're following at least safe sex practices in the sense that you're tracking those things and you're checking those things, which I think if you're going to have intercourse, you should be doing. We're talking about something that's life altering. If you're going to jump out of an airplane, you better make sure you have a parachute. There's certain things when you're going to have intercourse that you should be making sure of that you're doing. And within 4 weeks, to me, I think that's plenty of time to go, well, what do I want to do? And it's, we're not sitting there going, all right, you got 5 minutes. Are we keeping this thing or are we pitching it?
Yeah.
No. And that was another big thing of why I liked the first heartbeat law was the fact that, that gives the average person a buffer to get to a point where they have time to process it, lay everything out, and to me make a conscious decision, at least one coming from having enough time to think about the best options for them. before you get to that point. And to me, if you haven't thought about it and you're still unsure by the time that 6 weeks comes, well, you ran out of time. You should have figured it out.
Yeah. And so, like, I just want to hone in the point that, like, I have told this to people and they think that I am like some sort of like demented person and I'm just trying to blame women for having sex. And it's like, no, I never stated the such. I just simply stated that if you don't want this outcome, you should be vigilant and either try to figure out whether or not you have that outcome or do everything you can to prevent it, right? If you don't want to have lung cancer, right? But you want to smoke cigarettes, right? You should probably get checked every year or, bi-yearly, right? In order to check
or
whether
not smoke cigarettes.
Exactly, right? So you should be checking to make
I want to have unprotected sex 9 times a day, 10 times a week. 10 days
Right.
a week. That would be amazing, but the likelihood of me getting someone pregnant or getting an STD, the amount of partners, you skyrocket.
Right.
The more you do unsafe things or things that can have outcomes you don't like, the more you do it, the more likely those unforeseen outcomes are going to happen. It's statistics at the end of the point. It's a numbers game there.
Right. If you're going to engage in a risk behavior, right, you need to realize that you are consenting to the potential consequences of that. And that directly goes into the argument that they like to provide, which is I consented to sex, but I didn't consent to pregnancy.
You did.
Exactly.
And that's one of my big things. Like you brought up the smoking thing. It's smoking. The difference with it, we didn't know it caused cancer, or at least the public didn't know until like the 50s. I understand that people in the early 1900s that smoked and then got cancer, and I can't look at that old man and go, well, you should have known you got cancer. Well, no. No one was telling these people that smoking caused cancer. I'll give you the pass on that one, but humans have been around, depending on what you believe in evolution or creationism. Creationism, humans have been around at least 6,000 years, and that's been the way it's worked for that entire time. If you believe in evolution, we've been here at least 250,000 to 1,000,000 years, and intercourse makes babies. This is, we're not talking about something that's a new discovery in science. It's been this way since we were cavemen and hitting people over the head with clubs. This isn't something new that we have to figure out. And again, I'm total agreement with you on that. It's the accountability that I think is the biggest part that upsets me. Is, again, not saying your argument doesn't have grounds in the fact that you're not allowed to have the argument of being pro-abortion. You are more than welcome to sit down and give me that argument, but just be accountable for the things that come along with that.
Right. Yeah, and so that's like a perfect segue into the other point or question that I like to ask, right, which is the legality behind like criminalizing abortion, right? So I'm going to pose this hypothetical to you that was posed to me by my brother, right? Because his opinion, I don't necessarily know exactly how, so I'm not going to attempt to represent, but he's not an abortion abolitionist like myself, but he's not completely pro-abortion, right? So he's somewhere in that middle ground, and I don't want to misrepresent, so I'm not going to speak further upon that. But
Sure.
he asked me this beautiful and elegant question that I'm going to literally use for the rest of my abolitionist career. So, but I've altered it, right? So let's say you and I are in a car, and we're driving. I'm the driver. You're my passenger. All right? I am at fault for an accident for which you die, but I don't. What legal repercussions should I receive for that?
Well, there's you run into the issue of what exactly was the at fault. I think if it's something that, like, let's say you were speeding and going 125 while you were drunk and swerving in and out of traffic and you caused someone's death, yeah, you should have known as a human being that doing those steps could lead to an accident, and the fact that it led to someone's death, you're at fault. Now, if you're found at fault for the accident, but let's say it was something that I think most people would agree was an accident, then you run into the legality side of it. That's where I'm kind of hit or miss on legality side. There's plenty of car accidents that lead to death that the person's found at fault, but I think most people would agree that, like if someone goes stop at a stop sign, they slide through the stop sign, and hit a car and that person dies, well, that person was trying to stop. They slid through. The person was found at fault because their car didn't operate properly, but that still led to their death. But I don't think anyone would agree that that person that tried to stop and slid through, should be held to the highest accountability for that person's death. So it's the legality where you said legality, the part that kind of threw me. I get the analogy you're trying to paint, but when legality gets thrown into things, it kind of changes things a little bit, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't think the law should be just hard and cut. It should have some nuance.
The law should never be hard and cut. There should always be nuance between everything. There are very few laws, I think, in this country and should exist in life that should just be white or black. There's circumstances, there's context to every situation, and I think the American justice system does, if it's enacted properly, does a pretty good job of that. Judges are supposed to take every situation with a grain of salt and look at it uniquely and originally, and that's why they have are allowed to change the punishment depending on how they see fit, depending on the crime and the level of which it was done. What was it? Violent? Was it not violent? Is the person truly remorseful or not? There's different things that go along the way that can change that legality. Having just in my mind, when you talk about a white and black law, someone stole, so we have to cut off their hand. And they still do that in the Middle East, and that was a very popular practice through Europe, Asia, Africa, and throughout lots of cultures throughout history. And it didn't matter what you stole. If you were a thief, you lost a hand. And that was a white-black law. If we caught you stealing, you lost your hand. Well, what if the person stealing the apple was starving and they were trying to feed themselves? Now, again, that's the best of I stole something analogy.
Right.
Fair enough. But do you think that kid stealing the apple deserves to have his hand cut off because he was starving? No. Should he be reprimanded and go, hey, don't steal crap? Because when you get older as an adult, we'll cut your hand off. There needs to be that gray area there where someone needs to step back and go, this kid wasn't trying to be malicious to hurt anyone in that theft. Do we really need to cut his hand off? So I definitely think laws should always be gray area laws. You should never just look at one and punish everyone for committing the same crime the same way.
Okay. Yeah, because the actual charge that actually does not get sentenced very often, but the law that is on the books for this specific case is vehicular manslaughter.
Vehicular manslaughter. Yep.
Right. So now
unintentional death caused by your actions.
Yeah. So let's say same situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a mother with her newborn, right, in the back seat. She runs a stoplight. She didn't realize it was red. She gets T-boned. The baby dies. She survives. Again,
you're running into the accountability. It's in most situations, especially the reason that manslaughter is often difficult to prove is because you have to prove that the actions in which you did were borderline intentional, or that those actions had adverse effects. For example, if you were speeding, you may not have intended to kill that person, and that's when you enter the realm of manslaughter. But were you going 85 miles an hour and swerving, or were you going 5 miles over? That 5 miles and 20 miles over, it's the same charge. But there's that context there. So
right. And then the next step in the progression is she's pregnant, and then the baby inside the womb dies.
It'd have to be the same answer. I know that's not a definitive answer, and it's kind of like a wishy-washy middle ground answer, but it's, I think if the mother is, for example, you have the stories of the moms who have their 4 kids in the car, and they drive the car into the lake and hop out, and the kids die. Yeah, take that lady to the courtyard prosecutor, and then put a bullet in her head. That's my opinion. It's harsh, but you just killed 4 babies.
Right.
I am, that instance was 100%. You knew those steps. You were right gung-ho with them, and that was going to be the outcome, and you were doing those things, and it led to their death, and you knew you were doing something wrong.
Okay.
And those are ones 100% I'm behind. Yeah, you broke the law. You need to get charged for that. It's when you run into the areas where it's, she didn't see the stop sign and ran through it. Yeah, it's still her fault. I'm not arguing that. If you ran a stop sign and it led to a baby dying or your own child dying, it's your fault. You ran that stop sign, but should you be treated like a criminal for it? That's where I disagree.
Okay, so now let's take it further within the same logic, right? But this time we're going to prescribe intent. Okay, so a woman who seeks an abortion has malice and forethought about ending the life of the child which is inside of her, whether or not she's been convinced that it's not alive, it's not a child, it's not human, and dehumanizing it so that she can sort of justify the actions with which that she is going to be taking. Uh, what would you prescribe for a woman who purposefully falls down the steps in order to attempt to kill the child in the womb and force what would they would classify as a miscarriage, but she's attempting an abortion?
That used to be the doctor subscribed way of abortion back in the day. Sorry, I had to throw that joke out there.
Yeah.
Just fall down the stairs. Use a hanger. I think in that scenario, a lot of that comes down to what's the law say. There's a lot of laws I agree with, a lot of laws I don't agree with, a lot of things that I wish were laws. And if abortion isn't legal, and you go and have, a doctor, first off, accredited doctor is not going to be able to do the abortion. So if abortion's illegal, let's say if the law state's set up with my first heartbeat law, and then you go find a doctor who off the books is going to do the abortion for you at 7 months, and the books say that you're not allowed to do it after that first heartbeat, well then you broke the law. That's the part of it. My morality side of it is removed from it when I look at it, the law. If the law says they can do it, whether I like it or not, the law says it's there, then they can do it, and there shouldn't be repercussions if the law says they can. Now, that's where we as a free society come forward, and we get representatives that agree with our beliefs, and we change the laws and change things down the road. But until those laws are changed, whether I'm displeased with it or not, if the law says she can do it, she can do it. If the law says she can't, well then she shouldn't be allowed to do it, and there should be consequences for her doing something that isn't legal.
Okay, so what charge would you want her to be charged with for the instance that I gave of her falling down the stairs past your...
If you can prove it was intentional, and we're talking about her maliciously causing the death of a child, or an unborn child, and it's illegal in this state, I don't know. I think someone in that situation, you would probably want to get more mental health, which that's a whole other conversation to get into.
Yeah.
But to me, you probably in my head, 2 to 5 years probably makes sense. Most of which being in a...
So you want her to be charged with murder, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess you could call it murder.
Okay.
But yeah, there should be some consequence there. There has to be, again, it doesn't come down to the morality side of it for me. It comes down to whether it's legal or not. If it's illegal and she does it and you can prove it, well, then she's guilty of what the law says is a crime.
Okay.
And there should always be a consequence. You should always pay for a crime, regardless of what that crime is, whether it's you steal a sucker or you blow up a city. There should always be a consequence and a price you have to pay for that crime. And, I would lean more towards definitely mental health of someone who decides to throw themselves down a flight of stairs than hardcore prison for 5 years. But there should definitely be a price to pay for that.
Okay. So then what about the abortionist who is performing this action?
Same situation. There should be a charge there.
Okay.
I think in the instance of the doctor, my argument of, in my head, someone wanting to throw themselves down the stairs, I think most people would agree. If you want to throw yourself down the stairs, you got some loose screws, and you should probably see someone. The doctor, on the other hand, doesn't get that argument. That doctor is knowingly committing a crime. That doctor knows what they're doing. That doctor is enacting on his own free will to do it. And to me, that's no different than someone going in and deciding that this lady in the old people's home has cancer, and she doesn't want to see her suffer, so she gives, gives her medicine to kill her, and tells the family, well, she just died. And you hear stories about that. No, you knew what you were doing. You
Right.
took those steps, and you can't claim anything to me. You caused that death, and you committed that crime.
Right. And that's actually a perfect segue for me to let the viewers know that on an episode coming up this week, I have found, scoured, and read in depth essentially the handbook on how to perform abortions and the recommendations that NAF, or the National Abortion Federation, gives for clinics on the steps that they need to do, what needs to happen beforehand, and all of that. And so, Kyle, you said
Hmm.
that you've done quite a bit of research when it comes to this. Have you done research and know how the different procedures are performed within the different
So I
trimesters?
haven't seen all of the different procedures. I have seen videos and doctoral videos giving through what was it, sonar or whatever it is when they're looking at the baby,
Hmm.
or a camera actually inserted. And the process that I saw, I want to say was 3 or 4 months, but they essentially they go in and they rip it and cut it apart and suck it out with a vacuum. I know that sounds a little blunt and crude, but that's essentially the process that happens. Is they go in, they tear the fetus apart, they swirl it up until it's a gook, and then they remove it with a vacuum.
Yeah. So the thing is that when it's before 12 weeks, right, there's the abortion pill. All right. It's mifepristone, which is also known as mifeprex, and misoprostol. All right. And so the thing is that the mifepristone actually starves the child of the nutrients because it starts to degrade the lining and allowing for there to not be like the secure connection and allowing the baby to actually receive the nutrients from
Mm-hmm.
the mother's bloodstream.
Causes the
Where
cells to stop dividing.
right, and it completely starts to kill it off because it's not able to grow, not able to go through
Mm-hmm.
cellular respiration as it does at the point pre and post fertilization. Because beforehand, you know, the ovum, right, which is the egg that is produced by the mother's ovaries, it is living, but it's a cell distinctly only of the mother, right? And it is living, right, but it's not a human being until it becomes inseminated, and the spermatozoan, or the sperm, penetrates it and donates the father's genetic material within that cell, the ovum, to form what is called the zygote. So human development starts at the zygotic stage, which is the unicellular stage, right? But once you get to 12 weeks, you can't use this medication. And the other half that I was talking about, misoprostol, that is what causes the uterus to go through contractions. So women are typically told and given this medication not only through the male, but also they are given to them by clinical workers such as at Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers, right? And they're told just to take it home, and when they start to feel the contractions, get on the toilet and then flush it down, right? And so this is going into our waterways. And so the thing is that these drugs, they don't get metabolized by the body, and they get excreted in their like actual active forms. And the thing is that they have not done extensive tests on just how safe it is for our water and for us to be consuming it. And so, like, that's a whole other issue. But once it's past 12 weeks, or even before that, they can go in with vacuum aspiration, right? But once the fetus gets large enough, right, they have to cause what is called fetal demise, right? And that's the medical term for actually ending the life of the fetus, right? You have to kill it before you can dismember it. And they claim that it's for ethical reasons, right? But that is just a submission that it is alive, right? And they can't really deny that because they have to call it fetal demise. Why is it fetal demise if it's not living, right? And, but that gets into a whole other discussion. But they have to induce fetal demise either by injecting a saline solution to essentially poison the child, or they take a needle into the developing heart with digoxin, or potassium chloride, which is used in the lethal injection. which is what they're giving to the baby, and they induce a cardiac arrest, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's able to sense and feel all of this because nociception and other perceptory cells within the nervous system have already been developed, right? And so it might be in a slightly more rudimentary way than for a newborn, but they're still able to sense and feel that because it's been inundated in the literature that at 8 weeks, the embryo is able to respond to nauseous stimuli and like actually go through like the withdrawal reflex from that stimulus and like move away from it, right? And the thing is, once it's been dead for a while, then the skin and body becomes what's called more pliable, meaning it's able to be essentially ripped apart easier, right? And so they go in with these forceps and literally dismember it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have to put this onto a table next to them, and then they have to crush the skull and make sure that there's white fluid coming out of the vagina to know that they had gotten the brain, right? And then they pick out the pieces, and then they take the vacuum aspirant and suck out the rest of what they call products of conception, right? Which is what they want to use as dehumanizing terminology for the fetus, the developing human, right? And so I will be covering all of this in extensive and excruciating detail with videos, photos, and showing like the documents that I have. And I have all of this downloaded just in case that they don't want it to be public information anymore. And so if you go to my LinkTree, linktr.ee/provocative polemics, you will see a link there in order to reach my Google Drive, which has all of these documents available and ready. And you're able to view them. Most of them are PDFs and such. And so I guess that is a perfect segue into our next topic that I wanted to briefly cover with you because we were talking about it right before we started recording, and that's transgenderism, because you brought up talking about how you were watching my video and you said something about my opinion on transgenderism. Would you like to elaborate for the listeners?
My opinion, or
Both your opinion and also what you thought of what I said.
from what I heard you speaking on, it was very much the same in mine. In the fact that, you know, having understanding and respect for other individuals is important.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't think you should ever want to come from a place of you're wrong, so you're evil. I don't think that's a good place to come from. And most of your argument was, again, in agreement with me, where it's not so much their decision to do what they're doing, it's the forcing of other people to conform to their decision. At least that's what I took from your opinion. It's saying that you have to properly identify my correct gender that I'm identifying as, and if not, it's a hate crime. Well, you can't compel my speech. I'm allowed to have freedom of speech. I'm also allowed to have freedom of opinion and expression.
Exactly.
And, you know, I definitely agree with that 100%. The whole issue with men who identify as women in female sports was another one I agree with you on.
Oh, like Leah Thomas and such.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I plan on covering that in a future video and going into depth, not only with like the psychological science, but also with the biological and sociological science, right? So,
see, a lot of that topic for me is I don't want to say it's personal in the sense that I myself identify as transgender, but I have multiple friends who are. I have two friends who are I guess you would classify pre-op. So one identifies as a male, the other identifies as a female, and both have their original genitalia. And then I have a friend of mine who I was friends with since middle school, who is post-op, changed their name, and you know, for all three of them, I truly wish them nothing but the best in life, and I hope that the decisions they've made are the ones that make them the happiest. You know, you'll never hear me personally be upset that that's the choice they made. That's their choice. It's their life. You know, YOLO. You only live once, and it's your life. You know, people who identify as transgender deciding to alter their body, to me, is no different than people like my cousin who puts the spikes in his head and gets the big ears and hangs from hooks. I personally think that's weird, but it's his body. If that's the right, he wants to modify his body. And even to a smaller extent, I have 20 tattoos. I've modified my body. I have piercings. Now, people who are transgender and have had the surgery are definitely a higher end of that. And, you can discuss the fact that gender dysphoria may be involved. There's also I was thinking about it the other day, and I can't remember the medical term for it, but it's essentially a mental disorder where you believe that one of your body parts needs to be removed.
Oh yeah.
And these people struggle their entire lives, and there's
Yeah, it's dysmorphia.
dysmorphia. Okay, yeah, I was trying to remember it the other day, could not remember it, and they have videos of these people who believe that their leg needs to be cut off below the knee, and they struggle and struggle, and then finally they have the surgery, and these people continue to live happy lives who don't suffer anymore because they had their leg cut off. And to me, that is a mental problem, and I think those people would agree that
Right.
that have those, but that there's different steps. But if ultimately that decision is mainly affecting you and you're not forcing me to do something, then that's your life to choose, is usually where I come from a lot of that. It's
Right.
when you get in, like I said, you get in the point where you're telling me that I have to call you a man or I have to call you a woman. I can call you a chicken if I want. This is America. You can call me a loser, and I can call you a loser. There's a lot of things. It may make you rude, may make you an asshole. Totally justified, and you're allowed to legally be a dick in this country. That's most people get confused about the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not protect nice speech. The First Amendment, I forget the exact court case that the Supreme Court held, but it held that it was talking about the four-letter word, and if I remember, it was either shit or fuck on the guy's poster or T-shirt. And the Supreme Court justice, on his opinion that he wrote out, he said it does not matter the four-letter word that was used because the First Amendment is designed to protect the use of uncomfortable words. It's designed to protect words that we don't like, speech that we do not like. And that's what it's there to protect. So you may
Right.
not like that I call you a man if you identify as a woman. And while personally I would like to, if you ask me to do so, I'll take it under consideration, but you can't compel me
Right.
to call you something, period. And it doesn't even have to be that. You can't compel me to say yellow every other day. You can't compel someone's speech, and that's where a lot of my pushback comes.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Michigan bill that got recently put through? It's House Bill 4474.
I read partially about it the other day, and I don't remember the entirety of it, but if I remember, isn't that the one where it was starting to classify a hate crime?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it
I
basically-
partially read it, and
Yeah, basically, if you offended someone or hurt their feelings, right? Because it really the verbiage of the law made it really gray to where it was essentially very subjective to the perceiver of the vocalized speech, right? Which isn't right, right? So you had up to 5 years imprisonment and or a $10,000 fine for hurting someone's feelings, misgendering them, calling them a different name, using speech that could potentially put them in danger, which they classify as misgendering someone, or dead naming them, as they say. And they classified it as a hate crime as a misdemeanor.
see, I think hate crimes within, even like racial hate crimes, within their design, I think are wrong. Hate crimes shouldn't be part of the law. If someone comes and beats me up, you could argue they hate white people, and in my opinion, you're allowed to hate white people. You're allowed to hate black people. You're allowed to hate those people. Now, there's certain things you can't do to enact on those feelings. Like if I choose as a manager not to hire you based on the color of your skin, I can't do that.
Right.
But I'm allowed to internally or even express that I may or may not like a certain race. I don't personally, but that's legally protected in this country. And that Michigan law, if it did pass, it'll get overturned.
Yeah, it will.
It's
soon.
unconstitutional. It's
Absolutely.
compelled speech against the First Amendment. Yeah, hate crimes. It's like not only that, but hate crimes. A crime is supposed to be fair and even across the entire country.
Right.
Everyone should be held to the same standard. There isn't a single hate crime that's fair to everybody on the planet. Hate crimes only protect certain parts of the certain communities.
Right.
And that's my biggest issue with those. Not only that, but like you said, they're based in feeling. It's like a lot of First Amendment auditors who I myself am a huge supporter of
Oh, absolutely, same.
and believe in. You're not feelings police. You're law officers.
Right.
You're officers of the law, and feelings don't trump my rights, nor will they ever.
Hmm. Yeah. So, uh, I think we're going to end it for this time, as I can't believe we've been speaking for an hour and 15 minutes.
We could
But
probably go on for another 5 hours.
absolutely. But yeah. So yeah, I sincerely thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, being the first person. Definitely, we will do this again because I definitely want to pick your brain more so on the transgender issue and go
Sure.
into some of the other things. But yeah, do you have any closing remarks about what we've spoken about or that you want to let the listeners know?
No, I think at least for what we spoke, I got my point across for most of it. And like you said, we'll have more conversations.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, everyone. This has been Provocative Polemics, the place where we stay provocative and speak polemical, and that I like to give everyone a platform in order to share their voice and everything else. And so, if you wouldn't mind, please like, share, comment, and subscribe my content. And please visit my link tree at linktr.ee/provocative polemics to see all of my social media and being able to find all of my content. Thank you very much, and I will see you all next week. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can stay up to date with all of my new videos.